Okay, we need a little help here. Either the batteries are out or, yeah. Let's see first. The batteries. Okay, folks, read my lips.
I'll advance it for you while they swap the batteries.
All right. I was originally brought in to design the robots, which eventually turned out to be the Cylon Centurions. Some of the early concepts, of course, Ralph had done while he was on the show. Because he left Galactica to do some work on Star Trek Phase 2. So I started basing some of my Cylons on his designs, and then evolved to kind of parallel this creature, which was an early version of the Imperious leader. Let's try the next one. Just some additional concepts. Next. An idea of how the helmet might fit and how the wearer might look out through it. Next. And then some helmet variations. Next. And the final drawing, which Glenn Larson seemed to like. Some details. Because this was kind of on the heels of Star Wars, I didn't want to duplicate Star Wars with their stormtroopers holding these guns and running around shooting. So I thought, well, these are basically robots, so why not provide an armed weapon that they could use? They wouldn't be dropping them; it would be a different technology and so on. Well, they actually built the arm weapon into the suit but never used it because the studio provided them with these huge gloves that would have been blown off at first shot. And they didn't get it, so they gave them rifles that they could run around and drop. Okay. I can't read this fellow's name. I don't remember his name, but this sculptor. No, that's not Joe. Similar. Anyway, this fellow was brought in to do the maquette for the Cylon Centurion. Next. Pretty cool. Next. And then from that, he was able to sculpt in rigid foam the basic shapes, and then he vacuum formed over that to get the initial shells for this costume. Next. You can see some of the rigid foam pieces there, the red pieces, and the results. Next. Originally, they were going to have some kind of weird boot, which they thankfully just decided against. Okay, the helmet under construction. Okay. Next, yeah. You can see some of the early colonial helmet pictures up above there. Okay. And our first test shot, as it were. You can see our gun still being put together in the hopes that they would actually use it. They said no, but we know this guy, Boba Fett, who wants one.
And was the original design going to be chrome, or was it going to be that gray?
My original concept was that they would be a very dark bronze with kind of a green cloth material between. I think Glenn Larson was one that wanted chrome, so you can blame him for that. Or thank you for that. Next. See? Brush your teeth. Everything is shiny but the teeth. Get that remote. The the X goes in one way and the Y goes in the other. These on the calves that have slipped a little bit were actually supposed to be utility pouches and so on, which they gave to the bike riders in one of the Star Wars movies. How are we doing?
They apparently don't have the battery that fits it.
Well, you've got a new job. See those gloves? Don't you love them? And you can play hockey with them too. Okay, next. This is John Dykstra. Right here, this is Grant McEwen, and this is obscured. Next. Nice gluing. Can you guys move up, bro? This was another little job that I had after whipping out the Cylons. They said, "Okay, kid, what else can you do?" Because back then it was a kid. He said, "We need a perspective for the camera to see when the ships land in the landing bays." So I came up with that. I said, "Well, let me paint it large and then we can photo reduce it." They said, "Well, we really need to shoot this and we don't have time. Paint it full size." Full size was 2 inches by a half inch. And they reneged on the cornea transplant too. That's what really got me. Okay, next. Next. So the idea, in case nobody gets it, or a little hazy on this, is that this is the repair, this is the landing part, and these are the slots that they're taxied into for their launch on the other side of the bay. So naturally the view would be reversed on either side. Next. They had me do some stuff on the Bay Stars, and I started with this pentagon shape because that design was on their Raiders and their fighters. And so in some of my early drawings, I had the pentagon shape as a chevron of some sort on their arm, and I thought I'd repeat that. A lot of what I do in trying to unify designs is, that was an unauthorized button push. Your finger fell asleep and just automatically dropped. So a lot of what I do is a repeat design. That's why the Cylon's grill in the helmet matches the Cylon's grill in the chest piece. It brings a unity to the look of things that I'd like to design. So, and even if it's subliminal, so that's why I was going for that initial pentagon shape. And they also asked me to come up with some large engines to drive it, but obviously we didn't use those, and that's probably good. Next. I know, you've seen this before. These were just some additional ships I was asked for, concept-wise. Batteries aren't important. With neither of which worked. The bottom one was supposed to be a bomber, and the top was supposed to be the ship on the top. In addition to things like that, then they asked me to do some planets, bless you. So a lot of these were just flat paintings that they photographed for the evacuation out of the system after the attack. But then I got to paint Caprica, this big hemisphere, and its moon. So that's a hemisphere, obviously, that I'm dremeling out the craters and stuff like that. So they're going to light it. It's going to be a beauty shot. I've got Caprica all painted with all of the shorelines. It's all in acrylic, so it doesn't wash off. And then I painted the clouds in gouache, like a watercolor, so that they could wash it off and change the cloud covering to give it different views and different shots. And there I am touching up some of the relief on the moon. I'm all excited about the way they're going to film this. That's all you got to see. The moon looks great though, doesn't it? Here I am rubbing shoulders with Richard Edlund, the genius in the effects business. He came through Star Wars with Dykstra and has been doing this work. He's still doing this work. what we're doing is we're talking about backgrounds to use for different shots. And these were some magazine pictures that I'd cut out. This is a picture of the Earth. And you can't see it probably, but there's some frame references to show how the shot might look. And I storyboarded it. And that actually ended up being used, although the film coloring is bad, in these shots where the Cylons first go and do their roll down into the planet's surface on their initial attack. So what you're actually seeing is a picture cut out of a magazine in the background, but it worked. They did a great job on that. Yeah.
Is that a picture of a hurricane kind of crop?
Does it look like a hurricane?
It's like a big wall pressure.
That's right. I don't know. It was a picture of a magazine. I'm sorry. It was graded. It was great in the original color. This is all photo degraded, so sorry about that. Guys get that. And you wondered where all that ragtag fleets came from? So part of them were photographs of the models that they had. Part of them were little pictures that I blocked on there. And you put that against a star field and it's like thousands of ships. The coolest thing I got to do was this little ragtag ship that actually flies at the camera during the opening sequence of the show. So this obviously is blue screen shots. And you can see that, obviously, especially the ones in front, can see that it started out with an F-86 fighter, wings turned upside down. I added a bunch of stuff to it. You can see the detailing in the front. Oh, hello. That's better. So the holes in the top, of course, are the wheel wells. So it's upside down. You know, the swept back wings actually become the swept forward top with some other scratch filling stuff on it. And are there any people interested in modeling around here? Okay. Then I went to Star Trek Motion Picture. This was what I thought that the air tram should look like, the dropped curve off in San Francisco. I was the only one that thought it should look like that. A few other concepts. These were a couple of Epsilon 9 sketches, early concepts that might be based in an asteroid. The first thing I actually worked on, though, was the space office complex. So I went through several sketches. And then it went into these diagrams. This is about as drafting-like as I get. The arrow indicates where the top section meets the bottom section. And the miniature. I know, I'm sorry to spoil it for you. There was a miniature.
What gave you the idea to come up with that initial drawing?
The initial drawing?
Well, when you started sketching the office complex and stuff.
The question was, what gave me the idea to start this direction of design? My thinking was that while Star Trek was in the future, there might be some things that they still needed to do based on old technology, which is sort of our future technology. One of which are those giant tanks that you see on top. Those in my mind, are hydroponic tanks, where they grow all the food, create the oxygen and everything for the station. What's on top is dockyard control. While we only saw one dry dock, in my mind, and in my early concept sketches, there's like 5 or 6 dry docks with different starships parked in them. Of course, they didn't show any of that, but that's because they were all behind camera. So it's a factory in space. It's the space office complex that is the center for the dry dock orbiting facility. So my design method is form follows function. The function is that it's an office complex that's designed to support the dry docks. So therefore, you need a place for people to live. That's where we have these domestic units right here on both sides. This one's obviously still under construction. because there's just a whole bunch of new hires. And they're connected by these connecting corridors. There's 2 of them in case one is punctured. Then they can cross over to the other one in case they lose their technique. Then these are the offices. So there's an arm on either side for the offices. Down below is the factory facility. Wow, these are short life batteries. Let's try it. Going backwards for a reason. This really is second. To my rescue. Can we go back one, please? It's the bottom button. It's the top button. Can we go to the bottom one? Try 2 times? One more. With gusto this time. Okay. This is a top diagram, obviously. In the center is a recreation facility. I'll use this useless pointer here. This ring up here that has the windows in it is actually a recreation, the initial view of that space. Again, the shiny part is a photograph, and then the rest of it is what I was painting to fill in that area for my concept. That's the result. They were doing spacesuits. They were using a Sparkletts water bottle for the helmet. Like, people, we need something a little better than that. So because NASA, of course, is using spherical helmets, I came up with this idea of a backpack that would actually fly using these reaction control thrusters on the front and back. They might be able to maneuver it in 0G using those. So they did build most of it in their version by using that, but then they put in their own helmet. And I don't know if everybody liked that or not. And they needed a thruster pack in order to get Spock out of the Enterprise. You remember that. So these are concepts for that. And the result built by ILM. I got to design the new tricorder. Again, based on the old tricorder that actually folded open to use. This is a different version of that. And I got to build a model originally. The Voyager spacecraft was to be this artifact that was found and sort of crashed. So they picked it up the way it was and installed it in the Beecher return craft. So what you see here is some balsa wood strips, some cardboard that's been glued together, and a chili bowl cup that I had from one of my lunches. And a little paint. So anyway, that was the special effects version, the Robert Abel version that went to Paramount, and we did the vertical final version. So anyway, this is just an early concept. They also wanted to know what the inside of some of the effects would look like in Beecher. What I have here is kind of, they sort of used in certain ways, parts of that. This was my idea for the recognizer, that would be a little more dramatic. The idea being that once the recognizer gets the runaway between these things, it would just electrocute it to death instead of stepping on it. What is with this? They only actually used 2 of my ideas. One was the idea of having all of the circuitry radiate from their life disk. They liked that idea. The other idea was to use a cattle prod to get, what's his name, off the transport pad?
Bruce Fox.
Fox? No.
Fox?
No.
Jeff Bridges?
Bridges, yeah. So those were 2 ideas that they actually used. their cattle prod became a longer weapon. The Airwolf. So this is an early version where the engine is actually sitting on top of the wing. Oh man, I'm so unprepared. I just finished an interview with a magazine that goes into all of this in depth. It's a great Airwolf site, and you know what? I don't remember it, but
The Wolf's Lair is the magazine.
yeah, it is. Thank you.
You're
Wolf's
welcome.
Lair. And I think I have a link of it on my website, but I'm not sure. Anyway, if you can get a hold of that, it's the guy is doing a killer job on all of his issues. This was an issue that had me and the other art directors in it. So anyway, early version, the interior, the redesigned interior up above, me trying to tell Ernie what button to push and when. He was some awesome actor. The mock-up on a movable platform so that they can wiggle and jiggle. This is the behind-the-scenes view of the rear cockpit electronics. The logo, arm patch. In case nobody's recognized it, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. The idea being that Airwolf changed into what looked like a super executive helicopter, but when necessary, the weapons came out and it kicked a little butt. Or a big butt, do whatever's in front of it. Some of the concepts for Santini Air. Final version. Jeep, obviously. The other Jeep. and the Lair. So there you have an intimate Hollywood scene with 2 people and 25 technicians. Going that way. I did Street Hawk. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Street Hawk.
Oh, long time ago.
Yeah, the idea was that this bike was supposed to go 300 miles an hour. Yeah. Stay on the ground, yeah. So I designed it for that, with the exception of these wheel systems. My website has the pictures of my drawings. I included more hardware stuff in these slides, so I don't have a lot of drawings. But the idea was that I put racing hubs on these wheels and a special drive system. But they saw these in a magazine and said, we got to have those wheels, they look really cool. And I said, but that's a chain drive. You're not going to go 300 miles an hour in a chain drive. They go, yeah, this is going to be great. So this started out, as you can see, with a Honda dirt bike. And what they did, for all you modelers out there, is that you can see they got a wireframe to they bent out to kind of conform to the shape. They took my drawing and they blew it up to full size. Took me half an hour to sign that one because it was so big. But anyway, so then they just put a lot of rigid foam on there and started sculpting it. How cool was that? Then whatever engine parts they made, I don't know how they fabricated those, probably some vacuum forming and so on. I wasn't at the model shop during most of this. And then from that to finish. And then the controls. Gene Roddenberry's The Great Bird of the Galaxy. I'm sure you've heard that, and if not, you just have. So I did this for him, gave it to him as a birthday present. He smiled. Sorry, some of these are so small. These were some early versions of the bridge. I was brought on, I was the 5th person hired on Next Generation to initially design the bridge. Gene wanted everything really huge. Very few people on the bridge. Most of it being obviously handled by electronics. He also wanted to have meeting spaces. There was a whole bunch of ideas that he wanted to incorporate in the new bridge. So this was one of several concepts. I even put a second deck level in this version, with the conference table behind and the 2 turbo lift shafts on either side. Then it kind of got melted down into the version you see above, where they actually wanted to have a conference table on the bridge, which I thought was a little weird. Kurt's sitting here, how's that? Picard's sitting here looking at the thing. He says, "We got to have a meeting." He goes back, he sits at the table, he says, "Okay, now let's have a meeting." That didn't make sense to me. So I talked them into going with the officer's lounge in the back, which they did for their meetings. They took that center area, and they still kept the tactical rail, which I was glad to see. They put the 3 command positions in there, and everything else is pretty much as you saw on TV. Constructing the bridge was interesting. They built the ceiling, and they sort of hoisted that up into place, secured that off, and they put in the sides around it. It's much taller than you would initially expect. They don't really show any of that on the screen, and they never shot anything out through that window I gave them. So that was kind of sad.
Did you have the say in the Herman experience set?
No, I didn't. No, they went to Herman Zimmerman, but the question was about the Star Trek experience. I had no say in that.
Have you seen it?
I have seen that. The bridge is altered, basically. Yeah, it's smaller, the proportions are weirder, but it's still fun. I have a bug up my rear tailpipe about equal access, so I provided ramps in the Enterprise. And eventually it worked out because they had some guy in a wheelchair, so that was kind of cool. But I didn't want steps, I didn't want stairs, none of that. It was kind of cool. They would fabricate pieces and then simply haul them into the rafters until they needed them. So there were all these pieces hanging around. Anybody here of Susan Sackett? Susan was Gene Roddenberry's secretary. She and I were seriously contemplating going down on stage every night and collecting the sawdust to sell at conventions. The things you don't do when you have the chance. How stupid was that? Anyway, some of the structure of the overhead. Yeah, a really dark picture. I'm sorry about that. Going into Picard's office, which got renamed Ready Room.
Is that Gene's idea to name that?
No, that was Bob Justman's idea to make that. You can see on the stage floor, there's an actual template for making that ceiling piece. Or I can see it because I'm closer. So I'm telling you, it's right there. So they built it, and like I said, they hoisted it up above. Hollywood sets have what's called a wild section in them. A wild section means that section of wall can be wilded out or removed in order for the film crew to get in and shoot that set. What you have here is the wild section for the front of the bridge. This is where the view screen puzzles into the set. Sorry, it really is a set. And there's sort of the final version of what that looked like. Cleaning crew. You can never trust those Starfleet cleaning people who do stuff around. Look at that. Yeah. So a rare view of the tactical realm. Now, there was a lot of talk about the next generation, quote, replacing Kirk. There was a lot of apprehension, a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of curiosity. Part of what I wanted to do was ease that by having a lot of things that were familiar to the fans of Star Trek in the next generation sets. Part of that being the continued use of the ship's silhouettes on one side, and using another distinguished gentleman, the plaque on the other side. Now, the cool thing about this plaque was that it was the original plaque, and only my name and Gene's were on it. Chief of Staff, Admiral Gene Roddenberry, Design Engineer, A.G. Probert. That was it. And I left the show, and they started looking at that and go, you know, there's a few more people that need to have our name on here. So in the ready room, Rick Sternbach and I thought it would be great for the captain to have stuff that captains traditionally have in their offices. Usually a painting of their ship, usually a model of something. So Rick and I did this painting. It's a co-painting. He did the beautiful background, and I did the ship. Are you doing it? Never do that. This is something that you don't know about, or typically. This is what looks like a couch. But, in fact, it's a bed that rolls out of the wall. And the reason I designed that in there was for those moments when Kirk might have to be near the bridge and be up there at a moment's notice. He had a place to crash during those times. They never used it. But you can see at this one point that somebody has pushed the bed in too far, and the arm, which actually should be joining here, is hanging over the edge. So that's what's going on there. The other object that we thought would be fun would be a model of his last command, the Stargazer. Well, the Stargazer was a deep space exploration vessel. And so Rick and I thought about it. It has to go long distances. Let's give it a second pair of engines. It has to be highly visible. It's painted yellow. And that's sort of how that came about. Oh man, you really can't see that. Here I
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the one that
Win something in the E9 room as one. You'll go to that room and T-shirt for Bob. Congratulations,
You know what?
White.
Sure. I told my wife, I said, this is the right height for a stormtrooper. I'd say 6 feet tall. Oh, yeah.
No.
At least.
Not right next to. Those are fixed on this one. I'm going to build another one where it has open doors and stuff.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you, buddy.
That's better.